To help put some of the terms from the key terms list, some of those vocabulary words and content, here's a summary of some of the issues facing Canada in international trade. So, just want to clarify imports and exports. Imports are any kind of raw material, a lumber, a metal, a processed material. For example, when wheat gets ground into grains or into flour, some kind of semi-finished good like a car part or part of a table, a manufactured product, something that's finished, or even a service like financial advice that flow into Canada. And anything coming in is an import. And in the GDP calculation, you might see it referred to as the acronym I. And goods, or raw material, or services that leave as exports that go from Canada to another country are exports and will be referred to in the GDP calculation as an X. So this trade allows us to get rid of some of our surplus, some of the agricultural products like wheat, where we have a lot of it, can be exported to countries where they cannot be grown. So balance of trade. Balance of trade is exports minus imports. So if it's a positive number, it means you are exporting more money than you are importing, and money is flowing into the country. This is usually good because then the Canadian businesses can then put that money into the economy, hire people for wages, and it affects the economy. However, in recent years, Canada's balance of trade has become a slight negative. There's a lot of trade with developing countries, with BRIC countries like Brazil, Russia, India, China, and as a result, Canada is importing slightly more than it is exporting. So if a country exports more than they import, they have a trade surplus, which is good. If the balance of trade is negative, that is that they import more than they export, they have a trade deficit. This means that citizens and businesses are spending their money in foreign markets, and it often is the fear that this will lead to job loss, business closure, or dependence on other countries. Here's Donald Trump with some comments on trade.
These two words, fairness and reciprocity, are an open invitation to every country that seeks to do business with the United States. And they are a firm warning to every country that cheats, breaks the rules, and engages in economic aggression like they've been doing in the past, especially in the recent past. That is why we have almost an $800 billion a year trade deficit with other nations. Unacceptable. We are going to start whittling that down, and as fast as possible. With these goals, it was my profound honor to travel on this journey as your representative. I explained to all of the world leaders and across Asia how well the United States is doing. Economic growth has been over 3% the last 2 quarters and is going higher. Unemployment is at its lowest level in 17 years. The stock market has gained trillions of dollars in value since my election and has reached record highs.
So he talks about reciprocity and how the U.S. has a policy of reciprocity in his administration, which it means that they will do, if a country, they feel if a country takes advantage of them, they will pay them back by doing the same thing. So if Canada were to put a tariff on United States products, reciprocity would dictate to do the complementary tariff on the exact same goods of the same amount as a type of payback. But then Trump's actual actions show the difficulty in reciprocity because he is always of the view that the US is being mistreated and started to apply tariffs without actual concrete actions from other countries. Just having a trade deficit does not necessarily mean that other countries are taking advantage of you, but sometimes you might hear reciprocity in terms of international trade, and what it means is, that they have they are in favor of free trade, but if there's a barrier placed against that country, they will retaliate in kind. A tariff makes goods from the United States or whatever country the tariff is put on more expensive. Here's how it affects ketchup.
Even the humble hot dog isn't immune. Think ketchup and mustard belong together? A trade fight has them on unequal footing. US-made ketchup, like Heinz, is now subject to a 10% tariff from Canada. Mustard remains tariff-free, creating a condiment conundrum.
That might make me have to think twice. I might have to ditch Heinz sometime along the way.
Canada not playing nice.
Put aside the major economic consequences for a second.
I got questions about this. Felt pens and body wash. Why are you putting that on your list?
Today, a few Americans seem more focused on the fact that Canada's response just isn't very nice.
We've been very nice to Canada for many years, and they've taken advantage of that.
Canadian officials say they had no choice but to push back, pointing out Canada's retaliation is intended to be exactly equal to what the U.S. did first. Trump's administration doesn't see it that way.
Escalating tariffs against the United States does nothing to help Canada, and it only hurts American workers. The president is working to fix the broken system, and he's going to continue pushing for that.
Also at the White House today, former Prime Minister Stephen Harper spotted leaving the West Wing after his private meeting with senior Trump officials. No word on what was discussed. Canadians and Americans are both welcoming a new player to the trade table.
Viva Mexico!
Mexico just elected left-leaning populist Andrés Manuel López.
So you can see how retaliation isn't as clear as it seems. Chronologically, the US tariffs on aluminum were applied first, and then the Canadian tariffs were applied secondly, on Kentucky bourbon, on Heinz ketchup, things like that. But again, finding both sides to agree on a common set of facts is challenging. So imports can be good for businesses because they allow a store to sell a diverse collection of goods. You might see a grocery store that has all kinds of products from around the world, olive oil from the best regions of the world, different kinds of tomatoes, very wines, vinegars, very, very gourmet products. And without imports, they'd be unable to do that because they would limit the, they'd be limited to the selection within Canada. But one of the things, there is a risk to importing goods. Theoretically, you could end up importing a product that is not desired, or the costs could rise over the course of the agreement. Transportation could rise, or there could be tariffs, there could be something unexpected. I haven't seen the statistics for 2020 yet because they take a while to be collected, but I assume that 2020 has tremendously complicated international trade and increased the cost for exporters, and importers, I mean. So one way is to reduce the risks, to measure consumer interest ahead of time, picking reliable foreign suppliers, learning about the culture where you're going to be selling the goods, and inspect the goods for quality and quantity. Now, Canadians, when they see an importer, they might feel a little bit threatened because it's a chance that this could take away some of their business.
CBC News has learned that Canada is preparing to open the border to more American milk. It will be included in a new global trade pact being finalized next week in Atlanta. The Trans-Pacific Partnership involves the biggest trading countries outside of Europe. Rosemary Barton has the details and the potential impact. Rosie?
Wendy, sources tell us that the big trade deal is about 98% done, and that Trade Minister Ed Fast is going to take some time off from campaigning to try and get this agreement finalized before the election. The list of outstanding items, quite short right now, we're told, but topping that list, Canada's protected dairy industry. And now CBC News has learned that Canada is ready to open up a significant portion of its dairy market to the Americans. The Americans are asking for access of about 10% of the Canadian market, which would mean that they could sell American milk, cheese, yogurt, even butter inside Canada. This would likely be pretty shattering news for the almost 12,000 dairy farmers inside this country, some of them already using language like this could lead to the annihilation of the industry entirely. The Conservatives, though, are likely going to portray this as a win for consumers because it could lead to lower dairy prices for everybody, for all of Canada. And they'll also say that TPP will open up other markets in Asia for beef farmers, for grain farmers, for instance. But it is a gamble during an election because some of these dairy farmers are going to have some influence in some key ridings in Quebec and Ontario. And certainly there will need to be some sort of compensation package to the tune of billions of dollars for these farmers who will feel like they are being forced out of the market and the industry entirely. Wendy.
So, if you recall, the Trans-Pacific Partnership was cancelled by the United States when Donald Trump was elected. But that argument about protecting local industries remains, and especially in Canada, it seems like it is quite often those small dairy producers. So it's not just economics, it's a little bit political, because in their own communities and in their own ridings, they're significant employers. They can donate to political parties. They can lobby. They do have influence, and they can sometimes maybe affect a close election because they're spread out in many ridings in Quebec and Ontario. And so, yes, that could be good for consumers. Having a lower priced dairy, it's a necessity. But then, on the other hand, it may cause these producers to struggle. So, a couple of terms. Direct exporting is exporting a product directly to an importer without using an intermediary. So, it's just the, for example, let's take Heinz ketchup, because that was in the previous articles. Like they, they export it directly to Canada, and then it gets distributed to Canadian grocery stores with no intermediate steps. And that's great for big established companies. Like everyone knows Heinz ketchup, so it is very reliable. It's a well-known, reliable brand. It doesn't need, to promote itself. But a smaller business might try indirect exporting, where they might make a small batch of the product and arrange for a wholesaler to transport it to an importer, and several steps happen between the initial production in one country and the sale in the target market. So, for example, a natural resource like wheat, it might go to, the wheat is harvested, and then it is ground down into grains, and then it is processed, and then a intermediary takes all the wheat from the local area, perhaps in Saskatchewan, and ships it all at once in one batch to the United States, where it then gets perhaps used as flour in bread. So again, exporters and importers, they try to reduce their risk by planning. One example of a failed international business was Target. In 2015, it launched in Canada, and many thought it would take over just like Walmart and Costco had, but it just seemed as if the locations were not very well chosen. There was major distribution issues. The shelves were often empty. So although Target had items in the supply chain, it just could not get on time to Canadian shelves. So good planning and setting up good supply chains allow exporters and importers to succeed. It's not just about picking the best products. It's also about planning and taking care of the logistics. So Canada is the U.S.'s top trading partner because of their so that is the volume of trade is the highest because of their close proximity, their large market size, about 10% to Canada. The transportation infrastructure is tightly linked, highways and rail lines, the similar culture and the history of free trade agreements, which began in 1988 with the bilateral free trade agreement. Mexico was brought into NAFTA in 1993, and although Trump campaigned criticizing NAFTA, the new U.S.-Mexico-Canada agreement was signed into law in 2018. And despite all the rhetoric, there really has not been a tremendous amount of change in the volume of trade. And once Canada started trading with the United States, both economies benefited. And once NAFTA started in 1993, the economy of Canada, the United States, and Mexico has grown quite significantly. So trade, gives consumers more choice, and it really helps the economy get going. Other trading partners: China, the UK, Japan, Mexico, South Korea. Canada mostly trades with countries that have similar cultures because those businesses, they'll share preferences, things like non-verbal communication, decision making, the same kind of people skills or customs and traditions. And it means if the preferences in one area match those in the target market, it's likely that they'll succeed. Restaurant Brands International, which owns Burger King and Tim Hortons, is planning an expansion of Tim Hortons in the United States.
I'm 680 News Senior Business Editor Mike Eppel. Don't be surprised if you see more Tim Hortons, Burger Kings, and Popeye's Louisiana Kitchen locations. The parent company, Restaurant Brands International, held its Investor Day today, telling shareholders that they have major expansion plans for those three brands over the next decade. There are currently about 26,000 Burger Kings and Tims globally. They want to go up to 40,000 over the next decade, expanding the worldwide footprint, currently in underserved markets, overseas primarily, but also here in North America. It makes sense. In some cases, we could actually see a twinning of Tim's and Burger King locations, according to Robert Carter, an analyst with the NPD Group.
And not unexpected when you take a look at their units, over 17,000 Burger King units, over 4,000 Tim Hortons, and over 3,000 Popeyes. The ability to do a simple strategy of twinning some of those concepts could simply double the size of that unit count. There's lots of expansion opportunities, as Tim's has talked about, into China, into other markets around the world.
Now, Tim Hortons is also getting on the vegan breakfast bandwagon, as it has announced a deal with Beyond Meat.
Now, the Beyond Meat burger breakfast sandwich did not really work successfully. However, the expansion continues, and you can see that some of the U.S., China, some of Canada's top trading partners were among Burger King and Restaurant Brands International's expansion plans. Now, to facilitate trade, countries will sign trade agreements that allow goods and services to flow freely with less red tape across borders. And then this will lead to what is free trade. So trade without any barriers. In the other screencast, you learned about trade barriers like tariffs or excise taxes to increase the price of imported goods, or also quotas, just a limit on the number. Well, free trade proposes to sort of gradually eliminate all those barriers so goods can flow freely. A classic example would be the European Union, where anything that's made in one country can travel into another and be sold without any extra regulation. Anyone can work in any other country. There's free movement of capital, there's free movement of people, and it's reduces paperwork and costs. and Canada is involved in a number of free trade agreements as well. So the idea is that it reduces the costs and red tape and regulation for trade. So here are some of those, Canada and Chile, Canada and Israel, Costa Rica, Peru. They started a free trade association with Europe in 2009, and then they formalized it in as CETA, a trade agreement in 2016. South Korea, Colombia, Jordan, Panama, these are all some places where Canada has free trade agreements, and it was trying to set up a really big deal with the Pacific Rim countries, but that did not quite fall through. The US-Mexico-Canada agreement was relaunched in 2018, and Canada created a continuity agreement with the UK after Brexit that took an effect in 2021. So again, dairy farmers, they're worried that this new agreement might lead to, again, big dairy producers price dumping into Canada. Price dumping's when you sell your good at a very, very low price with the idea of eliminating the competition by undercutting their prices so much that everyone switches and no one buys the local product anymore. And big U.S. dairy companies have done this in other parts of the world, where they flood the market with their products, their dairy products, at a very, very low price, and the local farms and suppliers have difficulty keeping up. So if you want to Google a crazy event that you probably don't remember because you were about 5 or 6 when it happened, was in 2010. There was a G20 conference in Toronto and a G8 conference in Muskoka, and it led to this massive riot down on Queen Street. Banks were smashed, police cars were set on fire. A day later, there was another protest that led to mass arrests. People were detained for a week in a massive holding cell. It's like people were wearing, black tactical gear and masks, and this group called the Black Bloc was marching, and it was quite atypical for Toronto. But the international trade is a very, very highly charged political issue, because people feel that multinational companies are lobbying for free trade so that they can use their power, their big size, their economy of scale, to make goods cheaply, dump it in another country, and force the local suppliers out of business. They also feel that businesses will shop around and find the lowest wages possible, and it's just going to create this race to the bottom where workers get paid the lowest amount possible. It's a scene of 2010, and so maybe some of these people were anarchists, with the idea of purposely causing trouble, but there have always been a lot of people who are staunchly opposed to increased trade. It's not like something that's universally popular. So Canada participates in certain economic groups to negotiate more liberal trade policies. One of them is the Group of Seven, which used to be the Group of Eight before Russia was expelled. It meets annually. Canada, the United States, the UK, France, Italy, Germany, and Japan. And then the G20 is the next biggest country. It was created after the financial crisis in Asia in the late 1990s, where people finally realized that, there's a lot of money being spent around the world. We can't just focus on the traditional developed countries. We have to consider emerging markets as well, because they're a source of a lot of wealth. So that might include, Brazil, Indonesia, Australia, countries like that, the top 20 countries in the world. And the idea is that these create more liberal trade policies, and then they also might be the foundation for environmental agreements, promoting human rights, promoting equal education, and increasing social welfare around the world. Another group that Canada is involved with is APEC. It's a group of Pacific Rim countries designed to increase economic cooperation across the Pacific Ocean. So although we do tend to trade a lot with the US, if you recall, we are big traders with Hong Kong, South Korea, and China. So we have an interest in promoting Canadian goods. You can also see there's a lot of islands and countries with small land masses in this group. So they are a willing importer of Canadian natural resources. So the biggest, trade association in the world is the European Union, which united as a 12-member country. Now it's 27, and so it includes, almost 500,000 people. They're very, very highly dependent. However, the Great Britain voted to leave, and Brexit was the name of them leaving the European Union. They couldn't reach a deal to, formalize it, so we ended up with a no-deal Brexit, although they're still trying to find ways to continue the economic ties as much as possible. Canada, the second biggest trading partner, used to be the United Kingdom, although recently has switched, and now China is the second leading partner with Canada. And you might want to consider, well, why is that? Well, because of consumer goods, they can be cheaply made in China, so Canada is willing to import those. And then also Canada, China is a big buyer of, wheat and beef and other Canadian natural resources. Here's how over the years China surpassed the UK. So hopefully that helps define some of the terms by putting them into context. And you can review the vocabulary sheet with the definitions and the fill-in-the-blank sentences to test